The first snowflake landed on Nora Lawson's outstretched palm 3 weeks before November should have turned cold, and she knew immediately that survival had just become uncertain. She stood outside the general store in Columbia, California, watching the sky darken with an unnatural gray that spoke of a storm not meant for this early in the season. Her thin cotton dress and worn shawl the only barriers between her skin and the biting wind that had begun to sweep down from the Sierra Nevada mountains. The year was 1878, and she had arrived in this gold country town just 2 days prior with nothing but a carpet bag containing 3 dresses, a Bible her mother had given her before dying of consumption, and $17 that needed to stretch until she could find work. The mining town of Columbia had seen better days since the gold rush peaked nearly 3 decades earlier, but it still bustled with enough activity to offer hope for a young woman of 22 seeking to start fresh after the ranch she had worked on in Sacramento went under. The owner had sold everything to pay his debts, leaving Nora and 6 other workers without employment or references. She had chosen Columbia because her mother had once mentioned a distant cousin who lived here. But upon arrival, Nora discovered the woman had died the previous winter, leaving her with no connections and rapidly dwindling options. She pulled her shawl tighter, the threadbare wool doing little against the wind that now carried more snowflakes, each one fatter and wetter than the last. Her coat had been stolen from the stagecoach 2 stops back, along with her spare pair of boots, by a passenger who had disembarked in a hurry while Nora had been inside the station trying to stretch her legs. She had watched helplessly as the coach pulled away with the thief aboard before she could alert anyone, and the station master had simply shrugged and told her that was the way of things out here. "You need to get inside, miss." The voice came from beside her, deep and concerned, and Nora turned to find a tall man with sandy brown hair and striking blue eyes watching her with an expression that held genuine worry. He wore the typical clothing of a working cowboy, denim pants worn at the knees, a leather vest over a flannel shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat that had seen countless seasons under the sun. What caught her attention most was the heavy sheepskin coat he wore, lined with wool and designed for exactly the kind of weather that was rapidly descending upon them. "I will," Nora said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the shivering that had begun in her core. "I was just about to head back to the boarding house." The man glanced up at the sky, his jaw tightening. "This is going to be bad. I have been working cattle in these mountains for 8 years, and I have never seen a storm roll in this fast this early in the season. Where are you staying, Mrs.?" "Patterson's place, on the edge of town." Nora pointed down the muddy main street toward the small wooden structure she had paid for through the week. "That is a good walk in weather like this." He seemed to make a decision, reaching up to work at the buttons of his coat. "Here, you need this more than I do." "I cannot accept that," Nora protested, even as her body screamed at her to take the offering. "You will freeze." "I will stay close to keep warm," he said with a slight smile that transformed his serious face into something altogether more appealing. He shrugged out of the coat and held it out to her, and Nora could see he wore 2 layers beneath it. "I have more back at the ranch, and I am heading that direction anyway. My name is Benjamin Sutton, by the way. Most folks call me Ben." Nora hesitated for only a moment before the wind gusted hard enough to steal her breath, and she reached for the coat with hands that had already started to go numb. "Nora Lawson." "Thank you, Mr. Sutton. This is incredibly kind. Just Ben, please." He helped her into the coat, which hung large on her smaller frame but immediately provided a cocoon of warmth that made her want to weep with relief. The sheepskin still held his body heat, and it smelled of leather, hay, and something clean and masculine that made her pulse quicken in a way she had not experienced in years. "Where are you from, Miss Lawson?" "Nora," she countered, pulling the coat tight around her. "And Sacramento, most recently. I came here looking for work." His expression grew thoughtful as the snow began to fall in earnest, already starting to accumulate on the wooden walkways and in the street. "What kind of work are you looking for?" "Anything honest," Nora said, lifting her chin with a pride she was not sure she had earned. "I can cook, clean, mend clothes, work with horses, and keep accounts. I grew up on a ranch before my father died and my mother and I moved to Sacramento when I was 16. Ben nodded slowly, and Nora could see him calculating something in his mind. "The ranch where I work, the Double S, we just lost our cook last week. He decided he was too old for another winter in the mountains and headed down to San Francisco to live with his daughter. The owner, Samuel Sterling, has been doing the cooking himself, and let me tell you, none of us are happy about it. The man can work cattle like nobody else, but he cannot make a decent biscuit to save his life." Hope flared in Nora's chest, warm and dangerous. "Are you saying there might be a position available?" "I am saying I could take you out there tomorrow and introduce you to Sam if this storm does not bury us all tonight." Ben glanced up at the sky again, his concern evident. "But right now, we need to get you somewhere warm. Come on, I will walk you to Mrs. Patterson's." They hurried down the street together, the snow already turning the world white and making it difficult to see more than 20 feet ahead. The temperature had dropped dramatically, and Nora could see her breath pluming in front of her face. She was grateful for Ben's presence beside her, his tall frame blocking some of the wind, and even more grateful for the coat that was keeping her from the worst of the cold. Mrs. Patterson's boarding house appeared through the snow like a ghost ship, its windows glowing with lamplight. Ben walked Nora right up to the door, stomping his boots on the porch to clear the snow. "Thank you again," Nora said, starting to shrug out of the coat. "I will return this to you tomorrow." Ben held up a hand. "Keep it for now. I will come by in the morning to check on you, and we can see about getting you out to the ranch for that interview if the roads are passable. Besides, I do not know how warm Mrs. Patterson keeps this place, and you are going to need that tonight." "I cannot keep your coat," Nora argued, even though every fiber of her being wanted to do exactly that. "What will you wear?" "I have another coat back at the ranch," Ben assured her. "It is only a mile out of town and I have weathered worse than this. Please just keep it for now. I will feel better knowing you are warm." The door opened before Nora could protest further, and Mrs. Patterson herself appeared, a stout woman in her 50s with gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. "Get in here, girl, before you turn into an icicle. And you too, young man, if you have any sense." "I need to get back to the ranch, Mrs. Patterson," Ben said respectfully, "but I will be back in the morning to check on Miss Lawson here." The older woman's sharp eyes took in the coat Nora wore, clearly too large for her, and a knowing expression crossed her face. "I see. Well, do not freeze to death on my account, Mr. Sutton. Lord knows this town has lost enough young fools to pride and stubbornness." "Yes, madam." Ben touched the brim of his hat to both women, his eyes lingering on Nora for a moment longer than necessary. "Stay warm, Nora. I will see you in the morning." He turned and disappeared into the swirling snow before Nora could say another word, and she found herself staring after him with an unfamiliar feeling settling in her chest, something warm and fluttering that had nothing to do with the coat. "Well, come on then, Mrs. Patterson said, pulling Nora inside and shutting the door firmly against the storm. "Let me get a look at you. Are you the girl who arrived on the stage 2 days ago?" "Yes, madam," Nora said, stomping her worn boots to clear the snow. The boarding house was modest but clean, with a small sitting room visible off the entrance hall and a staircase leading up to the rooms on the second floor. I paid through the week. I remember. Nora Lawson, right? When Nora nodded, Mrs. Patterson continued, her tone more conversational now that they were inside. That Ben Sutton is a good man. Works hard, sends money back to his sister in Denver, and does not drink away his wages like some of the other ranch hands around here. If he is interested in helping you, I would count that as a stroke of luck. Nora felt her cheeks warm. He mentioned there might be a cooking position available at the ranch where he works. The Double S. Yes, I heard old Charlie Simmons finally retired. Samuel Sterling runs a good operation out there. He is fair with his workers and pays on time, which is more than can be said for some ranches in these parts. Mrs. Patterson led the way up the stairs, her steps heavy on the wooden treads. Your room is the third on the left. I have extra blankets if you need them, and I serve breakfast at 7 and dinner at 6. If you are not here for meals, I do not save plates, so do not expect any special treatment. Yes, madam, thank you. Nora followed her to the room, which was small but serviceable, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single window that overlooked the street. Snow was already piling up on the windowsill, and the wind rattled the glass in its frame. After Mrs. Patterson left, Nora sat on the edge of the bed, still wrapped in Ben Sutton's coat. She ran her hands over the worn sheepskin, marveling at the kindness of a stranger who had given up his own warmth for hers. Men in her experience were not often so selfless, especially not toward women they did not know. Her father had been a good man, but he had died when she was 15, thrown from a horse that had been spooked by a rattlesnake. After that, her mother had struggled to keep them afloat, taking in washing and mending until the consumption took hold of her lungs and left Nora truly alone in the world. She had worked on the ranch in Sacramento for 3 years, starting as a kitchen assistant and working her way up to head cook after the previous woman retired. The work had been hard but satisfying, and she had been good at it, managing to feed 20 hungry ranch hands 3 meals a day without running the operation into the ground. When the ranch failed, it had nothing to do with her work and everything to do with the owner's gambling debts, but that did not make finding new employment any easier without proper references. Now, sitting in this small room in a town she barely knew, wearing a coat that smelled of a man she had just met, Nora felt the first real spark of hope she had experienced in weeks. If Ben Sutton could get her an interview at the Double S Ranch, if she could prove herself capable in the kitchen, perhaps she could finally find some stability again. Perhaps she could even start to build a new life here in Columbia, strange and small as the town was. The wind howled outside, and snow continued to fall, already measuring several inches on the windowsill. Nora stood and moved to look out at the street, where the world had been transformed into a landscape of white and shadow. Somewhere out there, Ben Sutton was making his way back to his ranch, and Nora sent up a silent prayer that he would arrive safely. The thought of him freezing to death because he had given her his coat was unbearable, made more so by the strange connection she had felt standing beside him in the storm. She prepared for bed, washing her face and hands in the cold water from the pitcher on the washstand and changing into her nightgown. She hung Ben's coat on the hook by the door, then hesitated and brought it to the bed instead, laying it over her blankets for extra warmth. The temperature in the room was already dropping as the fire in the boarding house's main stove downstairs worked to keep the whole building warm. Sleep came slowly, with the wind as a constant companion, and Nora's dreams were filled with blue eyes and a voice that promised warmth if only she stayed close enough. Morning arrived gray and cold, with at least 8 inches of snow blanketing the town and more still falling, though less heavily than the night before. Nora dressed quickly in her warmest dress, a dark blue wool that had seen better days but still held together well enough, and made her way downstairs to find Mrs. Patterson serving breakfast to 4 other boarders, all men who worked various jobs in town. "Eat up, Mrs. Patterson said, setting a plate of eggs and toast in front of Nora. "You look like you could use some meat on your bones." The food was simple but filling, and Nora ate gratefully, listening to the men discuss the unseasonable storm and speculate about how long it would last. One of them, a clerk at the general store, mentioned that several of the roads out of town were already impassable, and the stagecoach scheduled to arrive that afternoon would likely be delayed by days. Nora was just finishing her coffee when a knock sounded at the door. Mrs. Patterson opened it to reveal Ben Sutton, covered in snow but looking hale and hearty, his cheeks reddened from the cold but his eyes bright. "Morning, Mrs. Patterson," he said, stomping his boots on the porch. "Is Miss Lawson available? She is just finishing breakfast. Come in and warm yourself." Mrs. Patterson ushered him inside, and Ben made his way to the dining room, where Nora had already stood, suddenly aware of how plain her dress was and how wind-blown her dark hair must look. "You made it back safely," she said, relief evident in her voice. "I did, though it was a close thing for a while there." Ben smiled at her, and Nora noticed he wore a different coat today, this one made of canvas and lined with flannel, not nearly as warm as the sheepskin he had given her. "The ranch is snowed in pretty good, but Sam Sterling is determined to have a proper cook before winter really sets in, so if you are willing, I can take you out there today. We will have to ride, though. The wagon is not going to make it through this snow." Nora's heart sank. "I do not have a horse." "You can ride with me," Ben said easily, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Sam said to bring you out for a trial, and if your cooking is as good as you say, the job is yours. Room and board included plus $40 a month." $40 a month was more than Nora had made in Sacramento, and room and board meant she would not have to worry about paying for lodging or food. It was almost too good to be true, and she found herself nodding before she could think better of it. "I will need to get my things," she said. "I will wait," Ben assured her. 15 minutes later, Nora had packed her carpetbag and settled her account with Mrs. Patterson, who had given her a knowing look and told her not to be a stranger if things did not work out at the ranch. She bundled herself into Ben's sheepskin coat, which she had retrieved from her room, and followed him outside to where 2 horses stood tied to the rail, both of them sturdy animals built for work rather than speed. Ben helped her mount the first horse, a bay mare with a gentle eye, and then secured her carpetbag to the saddle before mounting his own horse, a tall chestnut gelding. "Stay close to me," he said, maneuvering his horse beside hers. "The trail is pretty covered, but I have ridden it enough times to know the way even in weather like this." They set off through the snow-covered streets of Columbia, and Nora was grateful for the coat and for Ben's presence beside her. The world was eerily quiet, muffled by the snow, and the few people they passed were hurrying about their business with heads down against the cold. Once they left the town behind, the landscape opened up into rolling hills dotted with pine trees, all of it covered in white. Ben kept his word, staying close enough that Nora could hear him when he spoke, pointing out landmarks that were barely visible through the snow. "That is Miwok Creek down there," he said at one point, gesturing to a line of trees that marked where the water ran. "It freezes solid most winters, but this is the earliest I have ever seen it ice over." "How long have you been at the Double S?" Nora asked, eager to learn more about this man who had shown her such unexpected kindness. 8 years, like I mentioned yesterday, Ben said. I came out here from Kansas after my parents died of influenza. My sister Emma was only 14 at the time, and I did not want to leave her, but there was no work for me back there. I send her money every month, and she lives with our aunt in Denver now. She is 22 this year, same as you. That must have been difficult leaving her, Nora said softly. It was the hardest thing I have ever done, Ben admitted, his voice rough. But it was the only way I could give her a chance at a better life. She is a school teacher now, which makes all the sacrifice worth it. Nora felt a surge of respect for this man who had given up so much for his sister. You must miss her terribly. Every day, Ben said, but she writes to me regularly and I visit when I can. Last year I managed to get away for Christmas and we spent a week together. It was good to see her so happy and settled. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the crunch of snow under the horses' hooves and the occasional call of a bird brave enough to venture out in the storm. Nora found herself stealing glances at Ben, noticing the strong line of his jaw, the capable way he handled his horse, and the patient manner in which he answered her questions. Tell me about the ranch, she said eventually. What should I expect? Sam Sterling owns about 2,000 acres and runs around 300 head of cattle, Ben explained. It is not the biggest operation in the area, but it is one of the most profitable because Sam is smart about how he manages things. He employs 6 full-time hands, including me, and brings on extra help during branding and roundup seasons. The main house is where Sam and his wife live, and there is a separate bunkhouse for the hands. The kitchen is attached to the main house, but you would have your own room in a small cabin near the kitchen. Old Charlie lived there for 12 years before he retired. Sam is married, Nora asked, wondering what the wife would think of a new female employee on the ranch. Was, Ben corrected gently. His wife Margaret died giving birth to their son 3 years ago. The baby did not survive either. Sam has not been the same since, but he is still a fair boss and a good man. The tragedy of it struck Nora deeply, and she felt her throat tighten with sympathy for a man she had not even met. That is heartbreaking. It is, Ben agreed, but he keeps going, keeps the ranch running, keeps all of us employed. That takes strength. The Double S Ranch came into view about an hour after they left Columbia, materializing through the falling snow like a dream. The main house was a 2-story structure built of timber and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front and side. Several outbuildings dotted the property, including a large barn, a bunkhouse, a stable, and a small cabin that Nora assumed must be the cook's quarters. Smoke rose from multiple chimneys, promising warmth inside. Ben led them to the main house, where he dismounted and then helped Nora down from her horse. His hands were strong on her waist, and he held on for just a moment longer than necessary, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready," Nora confirmed, though her heart was pounding with nervousness. They climbed the steps to the porch, and Ben knocked on the door before opening it and calling out, "Sam, I brought Miss Lawson." The interior of the house was warm and surprisingly well appointed, with a large front room that held comfortable furniture and a stone fireplace where a fire crackled merrily. A man emerged from what Nora assumed was the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel and looking harried. Samuel Sterling was in his early 40s, with dark hair going gray at the temples and a face that spoke of too many hard days and not enough laughter. But his eyes were kind when they settled on Nora, and he managed a tired smile. "Miss Lawson, welcome to the Double S," he said, extending his hand for a shake. Ben tells me you are looking for a cooking position. Yes, sir, Nora said, shaking his hand firmly. I have 3 years of experience cooking for a large ranch crew, and I can provide testimony to my abilities if you need references. Sam glanced at Ben, who nodded encouragingly, and then back at Nora. How about instead of references, you show me what you can do? I was just about to start on lunch for the men, and I will be honest with you, I am terrible at it. If you can make a decent meal out of what I have in the kitchen, the job is yours. Relief and determination flooded through Nora in equal measure. I would be happy to. Sam led her to the kitchen, which was spacious and well-equipped, with a large cast iron stove, multiple work surfaces, and shelves lined with supplies. Nora could see immediately that the previous cook had kept things organized, and a quick inventory revealed flour, cornmeal, dried beans, salt pork, potatoes, onions, and various spices. I can make a beef stew with biscuits, Nora said, already mentally planning the meal. Do you have any fresh meat? There is a venison roast in the cold cellar, Sam said. Ben shot the deer 2 days ago, and we have been eating it plain and overcooked ever since. Venison stew, then, Nora amended, already moving through the kitchen with the confidence of someone who knew her way around a cooking space. It will be ready in about 2 hours. Sam looked like she had just offered him a miracle. Take whatever you need. Ben and I will be in the front room if you need anything. Once the men left, Nora set to work with a focus that allowed her to forget her nervousness. She retrieved the venison from the cold cellar, a small underground space designed to keep food fresh during the warmer months and prevent it from freezing solid during winter. The meat was good quality, and she cut it into cubes, browning them in a large pot with some of the fat she rendered from the salt pork. While the meat cooked, she peeled and chopped potatoes, carrots, and onions, adding them to the pot along with some of the dried herbs she found in the cupboard. She made a rich gravy with flour and water, seasoning it carefully, and then set the stew to simmer while she mixed up a batch of biscuit dough. The rhythm of cooking was soothing, familiar, and Nora found herself relaxing as the kitchen filled with the savory aroma of stew, and the warmth from the stove drove away the chill from outside. She made more biscuits than she probably needed, but ranch hands were always hungry, and it was better to have too much than too little. While the biscuits baked, she made a quick survey of the pantry and noted what supplies would need to be replenished soon. She also noticed that the kitchen could use a thorough cleaning, and she made a mental note to tackle that task if she was hired. 2 hours later, as promised, she had a pot of steaming venison stew and 24 golden biscuits ready to serve. She found Ben and Sam in the front room, along with 4 other men who had been introduced as the ranch hands: Jake, Henry, Tom, and William. All of them looked cold, tired, and hungry, having spent the morning tending to the cattle in the storm. "Lunch is ready," Nora announced, and the transformation in the room was immediate. The men practically stampeded into the kitchen, where Nora had set out bowls, plates, and utensils on the large wooden table. She served the stew, watching as each man took his first bite, and the expressions of pure bliss that crossed their faces told her everything she needed to know before anyone said a word. "Lord have mercy," Jake breathed, a man in his 30s with a weathered face and calloused hands. "This is the best thing I have eaten in months. These biscuits," Henry added, his mouth full. "These are perfect." Sam Sterling took his time, eating several bites before he looked up at Nora with genuine gratitude in his eyes. "Miss Lawson, if you want this job, it is yours. I will pay you $45 a month, room and board included, and you will have Sundays off unless there is something urgent." $45, Nora repeated, stunned. That was more than she had expected. "You are worth it," Sam said simply. "When can you start?" "Right now, if you need me to," Nora said, unable to keep the smile from her face. "Then consider yourself hired." Sam stood and shook her hand again, this time with more warmth. "Ben, can you show Miss Lawson to the cook's cabin and help her get settled?" "Yes, sir," Ben said, standing as well. Nora noticed he had eaten 3 bowls of stew and at least 6 biscuits, and the approval in his eyes when he looked at her made her feel warm all over. The cabin was small but charming, with a single room that held a bed, a stove, a table with 2 chairs, and several shelves for personal belongings. A door at the back led to a small washroom with a basin and a mirror, and there was even a window with curtains that overlooked the main yard. "Charlie kept it pretty clean," Ben said, setting Nora's carpet bag on the bed. "But if you need anything, just let me know and I will make sure you get it." "It is perfect," Nora said honestly, running her hand over the quilt that covered the bed. After the uncertainty of the past few weeks, having a space of her own felt like a luxury beyond measure. Ben lingered in the doorway, seeming reluctant to leave. "I am glad you are here," he said finally. "Not just because you can cook, though that is definitely a point in your favor. I meant what I said yesterday. I will stay close." Nora met his gaze and something passed between them, something warm and promising that made her pulse quicken. "I am glad I am here too." Over the next several weeks, Nora settled into life at the Double S Ranch with an ease that surprised her. The work was demanding, with 6 hungry men to feed 3 times a day plus Sam Sterling, who often joined the hands for meals rather than eating alone in his big house. But Nora thrived on the routine, taking pride in the meals she created and the way the men appreciated her efforts. She rose before dawn each morning to start breakfast, usually a hearty combination of eggs, bacon or sausage, fried potatoes, and fresh biscuits or pancakes. Lunch was often soup or stew with bread, something filling that could simmer while she worked on other tasks. Dinner was the most elaborate meal, with roasted meats, vegetables, and desserts that made the men groan with satisfaction. The storm that had rolled in so early had continued on and off for days, blanketing the ranch in snow and making work difficult for everyone. But inside the kitchen, Nora created warmth and comfort, and she noticed that the men lingered after meals, reluctant to return to the cold. Ben Sutton was a constant presence in those early weeks, always finding reasons to check on her, to ask if she needed anything, to help carry heavy pots or split wood for her stove. He told her stories about the ranch, about the cattle they raised, and the challenges of working the land in the Sierra Nevada foothills. He made her laugh with tales of the hands getting into harmless trouble, and he listened with genuine interest when she told him about her own life, her childhood on her father's ranch, and her mother's strength in the face of hardship. Nora found herself looking forward to his visits, to the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, to the sound of his laugh, and to the gentle way he treated her, always respectful but with an underlying current of attraction that grew stronger with each passing day. She caught him watching her sometimes as she worked, his expression soft and thoughtful, and she knew he was feeling the same pull she felt toward him. It was late December, a full 6 weeks after Nora had arrived at the ranch, when things between them shifted from friendship into something more. The snow had finally stopped falling, and the world outside was a pristine landscape of white and blue sky. Nora had finished cleaning up after dinner and was sitting in her cabin, mending one of her dresses by lamplight, when a knock sounded at the door. She opened it to find Ben standing there, his hat in his hands and his expression nervous in a way she had never seen before. "Can I come in?" he asked. "Of course." Nora stepped back to let him enter, her heart beginning to race. Something about the way he looked at her told her this visit was different from all the others. Ben closed the door behind him and stood in the middle of the small cabin, turning his hat in his hands. "I need to talk to you about something, and I am not sure how to start." "You can just say it," Nora said gently. "Whatever it is." He took a deep breath. "I have been thinking about you constantly since the day I met you. I wake up thinking about seeing you at breakfast, and I go to sleep remembering the way you smiled at something I said during dinner. I have tried to give you time to settle in, to not rush anything, but I cannot keep pretending that what I feel is just friendship." Nora's breath caught in her throat, and she set down her mending with trembling hands. "Ben, I know it has only been 6 weeks," he continued, the words coming faster now. "And I know you might not feel the same way, but I need you to know that I care about you, Nora, more than I have cared about anyone in a very long time. You are smart and capable and kind, and when I see you in that kitchen creating something out of nothing, making all of us feel like we have a home instead of just a place to sleep, it makes me want things I thought I had given up on." "What kind of things?" Nora asked softly, stepping closer to him. "A future," Ben said simply. "A wife. Maybe children someday when the time is right. A life that is about more than just working and sending money to my sister. I want to build something with someone, and I want that someone to be you." Tears pricked at Nora's eyes, and she reached up to cup his face with her hand, feeling the rough stubble on his jaw. "I feel the same way," she whispered. "I have been falling for you since that first day when you gave me your coat and promised to stay close. I did not think I would find anything like this when I came to Colombia. I was just trying to survive, and then you appeared and made me believe in more than survival." Ben's eyes closed briefly, and when they opened again, they were blazing with emotion. "Can I kiss you?" "Yes," Nora breathed, and then his mouth was on hers, gentle at first and then deeper, more passionate as weeks of restrained desire finally found release. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and Nora melted into him, her hands sliding up to link behind his neck. They kissed until they were both breathless, and when they finally pulled apart, Ben rested his forehead against hers, his breathing ragged. "I want to court you properly," he said. "I want to do this right." "Then court me," Nora said, smiling up at him. "Though I think we are both fairly certain how this is going to end." He grinned, and it transformed his whole face. "Still, I want to give you the romance you deserve. Starting tomorrow, I am taking you on a proper date. In the middle of winter on a cattle ranch," Nora teased. "I will think of something," Ben promised, kissing her once more before reluctantly stepping back. "I should go before I do something that would compromise your reputation. But Nora, I want you to know that I am serious about this, about us." "I know," Nora said, her heart full to bursting. "I am serious too." Ben's idea of a proper date turned out to be a sleigh ride through the snow-covered hills, using one of the ranch's flatbed wagons fitted with wooden runners and pulled by 2 of the gentlest horses. He had asked Sam Sterling for the afternoon off, and the older man had given his blessing with a knowing smile that suggested he had been watching the romance develop between his cook and his best hand. They bundled up in layers of clothing, with Nora wearing Ben's sheepskin coat once again, and set off into the winter landscape with a basket of food Nora had packed and several thick blankets to keep them warm. The day was clear and cold, the sun brilliant against the snow, and Nora could not remember the last time she had felt so purely happy. Ben drove the sleigh up into the hills, following paths that he knew from years of working the ranch, and eventually they stopped in a clearing that overlooked the valley below. From here, they could see for miles, the snow-covered landscape stretching out in all directions, broken only by the dark lines of trees and the occasional plume of smoke from a distant chimney. "It is beautiful," Nora said, her breath fogging in the cold air. "It is," Ben agreed, but when she looked at him, he was watching her instead of the view. They ate the lunch Nora had packed, thick sandwiches made with leftover roasted beef and fresh bread, along with some of the oatmeal cookies she had baked that morning. They talked about everything and nothing, their conversation easy and comfortable, punctuated by touches and glances that spoke of the growing intimacy between them. "Tell me about your dreams," Ben said as they sat side by side on the sleigh, wrapped in blankets. "What do you want from life?" Nora thought about it carefully before answering. "I want what most people want, I suppose: security. A home. People to care about who care about me in return. I never wanted anything grand or fancy. Growing up on the ranch, I learned to appreciate the simple things, the satisfaction of a good day's work, the pleasure of a meal shared with others. I want a life where I matter, where what I do makes a difference to the people around me." "You already have that," Ben said softly. "You matter to everyone at the ranch. You definitely matter to me." "And you matter to me," Nora said, leaning into him. "What about you? What are your dreams?" Ben was quiet for a long moment. "I used to dream about making enough money to bring Emma out here, to buy my own piece of land and start my own ranch. But lately, my dreams have gotten more specific. I dream about a house with a front porch where I can sit with my wife on summer evenings. I dream about children running around, learning how to ride horses and take care of animals. I dream about growing old with someone I love, someone who sees me for who I really am and loves me anyway." "I see you," Nora said, turning to face him fully. "And what I see is a man who is kind, hardworking, and loyal. A man who sacrifices for the people he loves and who gives his coat to a stranger in the snow. I see a man I could very easily spend the rest of my life with, Ben Sutton." His eyes grew bright, and he pulled her close, kissing her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "I love you, Nora Lawson. I know it is too soon to say it, but I do not care. I love you, and I want to spend my life showing you just how much." "It is not too soon," Nora whispered against his lips, "because I love you too." They stayed in the clearing until the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold. On the ride back to the ranch, Nora felt as if she were floating, her heart so full of joy she thought it might burst. The other ranch hands noticed the change in Ben and Nora's relationship immediately, and they teased Ben mercilessly about being love-struck and mooning over the cook. But it was all good-natured, and Nora could see that the men were genuinely happy for them both. Sam Sterling pulled Nora aside one evening after dinner and told her that he approved, that Ben was the best man he had ever employed, and that he could not think of anyone who deserved happiness more. The winter deepened, and with it, Ben and Nora's relationship grew stronger. They stole moments together whenever they could: walks after dinner, quiet conversations in the barn while Ben tended to the horses, Sunday afternoons when Nora did not have to cook, and they could spend hours together without interruption. Ben was a patient and attentive suitor, always treating Nora with respect and consideration. He brought her small gifts, wildflowers he found growing against all odds in sheltered spots, a pretty stone he had found by the creek, a book he thought she might enjoy that he had bought on a rare trip into Colombia. He told her stories about his childhood in Kansas, about his parents and his sister, about the struggles and triumphs that had shaped him into the man he was. Nora shared her own stories, opening up about the grief she had carried after losing both her parents, about the loneliness she had felt working at the ranch in Sacramento, where she had been just another employee rather than someone valued. Ben listened to all of it, offering comfort and understanding, never judging or dismissing her feelings. By February, everyone at the ranch simply accepted that Ben and Nora were a couple, destined to marry once Ben could afford to offer her a proper home. He had started saving every penny he could spare, adding to the money he already had set aside, dreaming of the day when he could buy land and build a house for them. It was Sam Sterling who changed everything. One evening in early March, just over 4 months after Nora had arrived at the ranch, he called Ben into his office in the main house. Nora was cleaning up after dinner when Ben found her an hour later, his face flushed and his eyes bright with excitement. "What happened?" she asked, immediately setting down her dish rag. "Sam just offered me a partnership in the ranch," Ben said, his voice shaking slightly. "He said he has been thinking about it for a while, that he needs someone he can trust to help him run the operation, especially as he gets older. He wants to give me a 10% stake in the Double S in exchange for taking on more management responsibilities." "Nora, do you understand what this means?" Nora felt tears spring to her eyes. "It means you will have security. It means you will have a real stake in something." "It means I can marry you," Ben said, pulling her into his arms. "Sam is also offering to let us build a house on the ranch property, something bigger than this cabin, something that could be a real home for us. Nora, I know we have not been courting for very long, but I do not want to wait. I love you and I want to marry you. Will you be my wife?" For a moment, Nora could not speak past the lump in her throat. Everything she had dreamed of, everything she had thought lost after her parents died and the Sacramento ranch failed, was suddenly within reach. A home, a husband who loved her, a future that promised stability and happiness. "Yes," she finally managed to say, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, Ben, I will marry you." He lifted her off her feet and spun her around, both of them laughing like children, and when he set her down, he kissed her with a passion that took her breath away. "I do not have a ring yet," he said when they finally broke apart, "but I will get you one, I promise. The prettiest ring I can find." "I do not need a ring," Nora said, holding his face in her hands. "I just need you." They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony in Columbia's small church, with Sam Sterling standing as Ben's best man and Mrs. Patterson, who had traveled out to the ranch several times to visit Nora and had become a friend, serving as Nora's witness. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Ben kissed Nora with such tenderness that several people in the small congregation dabbed at their eyes. The ranch hands threw them a celebration dinner that evening, with Jake breaking out a fiddle that Nora had not known he could play, and Henry revealing a surprising talent for singing. They danced in the barn, which had been cleaned out and decorated with pine boughs and lanterns, and ate a feast that included a cake Nora had made herself, layered with jam and cream. Sam Sterling gave a toast, raising his glass of whiskey and smiling more broadly than Nora had ever seen. "To Ben and Nora Sutton," he said, "may your life together be filled with as much happiness as you both deserve. Ben, you have been like a son to me these past 8 years, and Nora, you have brought warmth and life back to this ranch that had been missing for far too long. I am honored to have you both as part of the Double S family." Everyone cheered and drank, and then Ben pulled Nora close and whispered in her ear, "Are you ready to start our life together, Mrs. Sutton?" "I have been ready since the day you gave me your coat and promised to stay close," Nora whispered back, and they slipped away from the celebration to begin their wedding night in the small cabin that would be their home until their house was built. The cabin felt different now, transformed by the knowledge that it belonged to both of them, that they would wake up together here tomorrow and every day after. Ben was gentle and patient with Nora, mindful that this was new territory for both of them, and the love they shared made their union feel sacred. a binding of not just bodies but souls. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Nora's head on Ben's chest and his arms wrapped around her. "I cannot believe this is real," she murmured. "Sometimes I think I will wake up back in Sacramento or in that cold room at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, and none of this will have happened." "It is real," Ben assured her, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "You are my wife and I am your husband, and nothing is going to change that." "I love you," Nora said, tilting her head to look up at him. "I love you so much it frightens me sometimes." "I love you too," Ben said, his voice rough with emotion. "And I promise you, Nora, I will spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you never regret saying yes to me." Spring came to the Double S Ranch with a riot of wildflowers and warming temperatures that melted the last of the snow and turned the hills green. Ben threw himself into his new responsibilities as part owner of the ranch, working alongside Sam to make decisions about the cattle, plan the spring branding, and manage the hands. He was a natural leader, respected by the other men for his fairness and his willingness to work just as hard as anyone else. Nora continued to cook for the ranch, though Sam insisted on paying her separately now that she was part of the family. She took pride in her kitchen, experimenting with new recipes and using the spring vegetables from the ranch's garden to create meals that had the hands praising her skills daily. Construction began on their house in late April, with Sam hiring a crew of carpenters from Colombia to work alongside the ranch hands. Ben had drawn up plans for a modest but comfortable home, with 2 bedrooms, a spacious front room, a kitchen that Nora helped design, and a front porch that wrapped around 2 sides of the house. Nora watched the house take shape with a sense of wonder, marveling that this was truly happening, that she and Ben would soon have a home of their own. They spent their evenings walking through the skeleton of the building, planning where furniture would go, discussing curtains and rugs, dreaming about the life they would build within these walls. In June, Emma Sutton arrived for a visit, having taken a break from her teaching duties in Denver to meet her new sister-in-law. She was a lovely young woman with Ben's blue eyes and a warm, open manner that immediately put Nora at ease. The 2 women bonded quickly, and Emma confided in Nora that she had been worried Ben would never find someone, that he would spend his whole life working and sacrificing for others without taking anything for himself. "I am so glad he found you," Emma said one afternoon as she and Nora sat on the partially completed porch of the new house, watching Ben and Sam work on the barn. "I have never seen him this happy. You have given him something I could never give him, no matter how much he did for me." "What is that?" Nora asked. "A reason to build a life for himself instead of just surviving," Emma said simply. "Thank you for loving him." "It is the easiest thing I have ever done," Nora said honestly. The house was completed in early August, and Ben carried Nora over the threshold on a warm summer evening with the sun setting behind the mountains and painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The house smelled of fresh cut wood and paint, and their furniture, mostly pieces they had bought from families leaving Colombia or had built themselves, made the space feel like home immediately. That night, they christened every room of the house, laughing and loving with the freedom of people who finally had privacy and space to call their own. In their bedroom, with windows open to let in the cool night breeze, Ben made love to his wife with a passion and tenderness that left them both breathless. "This is everything I ever wanted," Nora whispered as they lay together afterward, her body draped over his. "You, this house, this life. I could not ask for anything more." "What about children?" Ben asked, running his hand down her back. "Do you want babies, Nora, someday?" Nora said, lifting her head to smile at him. "Not right away." I want some time with just you first, time to settle into being married and living in our new home. But yes, someday I want to fill this house with children." "How many?" Ben asked, his eyes twinkling. "As many as God gives us," Nora said, "though I think 3 or 4 would be perfect." "3 or 4," Ben repeated, pulling her up for a kiss. "I like the sound of that." The rest of that first year of marriage passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. The ranch prospered under Sam and Ben's joint management. With the cattle fetching good prices at market and new opportunities for expansion presenting themselves. Ben proved to have a head for business that complemented Sam's years of experience, and together they made decisions that strengthened the double Estiquet's position in the region. Nora thrived as well, not just as a cook, but as a partner in the ranch's success. She managed the household accounts, kept detailed records of supplies and expenses, and even started a small vegetable garden behind their house that produced enough to feed the ranch crew with some left over to sell in Colombia. She and Ben fell into a comfortable rhythm, working hard during the day and coming together in the evenings to share meals, conversation, and the physical intimacy that seemed to deepen with each passing month. They explored each other's bodies and souls with equal enthusiasm, learning what brought pleasure, what brought comfort, what brought laughter. In December, exactly 1 year after Ben had first told Nora he loved her, she realized her monthly courses were late. She waited another week before saying anything, wanting to be sure, and when she was certain, she chose a quiet evening when they were alone in their house to share the news. "Ben," she said as they sat together by the fire after dinner, her heart pounding with excitement and nerves. "I have something to tell you." He looked up from the ranch ledger he had been reviewing, immediately attentive. "What is it?" "I am going to have a baby," Nora said, watching his face carefully. "We are going to be parents." For a moment, Ben just stared at her, and then his face broke into the most radiant smile Nora had ever seen. He set aside the ledger and pulled her into his lap, holding her close. "A baby," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "Nora, are you sure?" "I am sure," she confirmed, laughing at his reaction. "Are you happy?" "Happy." Ben pulled back to look at her, his eyes shining with tears. "I am more than happy. I am overwhelmed. I am terrified. I am grateful. Nora, you are giving me everything I ever dreamed of and more." He kissed her then, deeply and passionately, and Nora felt the rightness of it all settle into her bones. This was what she had been meant for, this life with this man, building a family and a future together. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, with Nora experiencing only mild morning sickness in the early months, and otherwise feeling strong and healthy. Ben was attentive to the point of being overprotective, constantly worrying about whether she was doing too much, insisting that she rest more and let him handle tasks that she had always done. Sam Sterling was delighted by the news, and the ranch hands threw Nora a celebration when she announced it to them over dinner one evening. They all seemed genuinely excited about the prospect of a baby on the ranch, and several of them started carving toys and whittling small animals to give to the child when it arrived. Emma sent a letter full of excitement and congratulations, along with a package of baby clothes she had knitted herself, including tiny mittens and booties that made Nora cry when she opened them. In her letter, Emma wrote that she had never imagined her brother as a father, but now that it was happening, she could not think of anyone who would be better at it. Winter came again, the second one since Nora had arrived in Colombia, but this time she watched the snow fall with contentment rather than fear. She was safe and warm in her home with her husband, a baby growing inside her, and a future that stretched out bright with promise. The baby was born in late August of 1880, on a sweltering hot day when Nora had been convinced she could not possibly get any more uncomfortable. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the following afternoon, with Ben pacing outside the bedroom while Sam had ridden to Columbia to fetch the midwife. Mrs. Patterson had come to help, having grown close to Nora over the past 2 years, and she stayed by Nora's side through the worst of it, offering cool cloths for her forehead and words of encouragement when Nora was certain she could not go on. When the baby finally arrived, a lusty, squalling boy with a shock of dark hair and Ben's blue eyes, Nora wept with relief and joy. Ben was allowed in immediately after, and the look on his face when he saw his son for the first time was something Nora knew she would remember for the rest of her life. "He is perfect," Ben whispered, reaching out to touch the baby's tiny hand with one finger. "Nora, you are amazing. Look at what you did. Look at our son." They named him William Sterling Sutton, William after Ben's father and Sterling to honor the man who had given them both so much. Everyone called him Will from the beginning, and he was a happy, healthy baby who seemed to thrive on the attention lavished on him by not just his parents but every person on the ranch. Ben was a devoted father, waking in the night to bring Will to Nora for feeding, changing diapers without complaint, and spending hours just holding his son and marveling at the perfection of him. Watching Ben with their baby made Nora fall in love with her husband all over again, seeing a side of him that was tender and gentle in ways she had not fully appreciated before. Will was 6 months old when Nora realized she was pregnant again, much sooner than they had planned, but not unwelcome. This time, she was less nervous about telling Ben, knowing he would be thrilled, and she was right. He swept her into his arms and danced her around the kitchen, laughing with pure joy. Their second son, James Edward Sutton, called Jamie, was born in November of 1881, a quieter baby than Will but no less loved. Ben now had 2 sons, and the pride he took in them was evident to everyone who saw him with the boys. The house that had seemed spacious for 2 now felt perfectly sized for a family of 4, and Nora could not imagine being anywhere else or with anyone else. Her days were full of cooking, cleaning, caring for 2 small children, and helping Ben with ranch business when she could. She was tired most of the time, but it was a good tired, the kind that came from a life well lived and work that mattered. Sam Sterling became like a grandfather to Will and Jamie, spending hours telling them stories about the ranch and teaching Will, as soon as he was old enough, about horses and cattle. The old grief in Sam's eyes had eased over the years, softened by the joy of watching Ben and Nora's family grow. And he told Nora once that she had given him back something he thought he had lost forever when his wife and son died. Emma visited as often as her teaching duties allowed, and she doted on her nephews, bringing them books and toys and spending hours playing with them. She had started courting a lawyer in Denver, a good man named Robert who treated her well, and Nora was hopeful that Emma would soon find the same happiness that she and Ben had built together. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. The ranch continued to prosper, expanding to include more land and more cattle. Ben bought out Sam's remaining share when the older man decided to retire, making Ben and Nora full owners of the Double S. Sam stayed on in the main house, happy to be involved in the ranch's operations without the burden of sole ownership, and his presence was a blessing to everyone. Will grew into a bright, active boy who loved horses and could often be found in the barn helping his father with chores. Jamie was more thoughtful and reserved, preferring books to roping practice, and Nora encouraged his love of reading, teaching him his letters as soon as he was old enough to understand. In the spring of 1885, when Will was nearly 5 and Jamie was 3. Nora gave birth to their first daughter, a tiny, delicate girl with Nora's dark hair and Ben's blue eyes. They named her Margaret Rose Sutton, called Maggie, in honor of Sam Sterling's late wife, and the old man cried when they told him, touched beyond words by the gesture. Maggie completed their family in a way Nora had not anticipated, bringing a different energy to the house, softer and sweeter than her boisterous brothers. Ben was utterly enchanted by his daughter, declaring that she had him wrapped around her little finger from the moment she was born. "I thought I knew what love was," Ben said one evening as he sat in the rocking chair in their bedroom, holding Maggie while Nora brushed her hair before bed. "But every time I think my heart cannot possibly hold any more, one of you proves me wrong." "We are blessed," Nora said, moving to sit on the arm of the chair and lean against her husband's shoulder. "Sometimes I think about that day in Colombia when you gave me your coat and changed everything. I could never have imagined this life, Ben. 3 beautiful children, a successful ranch, a home filled with love. It is more than I ever dreamed possible." "You deserved all of it and more," Ben said, turning his head to kiss her temple. "You took a chance on a cowboy who had nothing but dreams and a warm coat, and you built this life with me. Everything good in my world exists because you said yes that day when I asked if I could court you." "I would say yes 1,000 times over," Nora whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "You are my home, Ben Sutton. You always have been." The children grew, and the ranch grew with them. Will proved to have his father's talent with horses and cattle, and by the time he was 12, he was working alongside Ben as a true ranch hand, learning every aspect of the operation. Jamie's love of books led him to become the ranch's unofficial record keeper, managing the accounts and correspondence with a precision that impressed even Sam Sterling. Maggie grew into a spirited girl who wanted to do everything her brothers did, much to Ben's consternation. She learned to ride almost before she could walk properly, and she had no fear of the horses or cattle that were so much larger than her small frame. Nora saw herself in Maggie's independence and determination, and she encouraged her daughter to be strong and capable, even as Ben worried about her getting hurt. Sam Sterling passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1890, at the age of 65. His death was mourned by everyone who had known him, but especially by Ben and Nora, who had lost not just a business partner but a father figure and friend. They buried him in the small cemetery outside Columbia, and Ben made sure that Sam's headstone was the finest that could be had, engraved with the words Samuel Sterling, beloved friend and partner, builder of dreams. The loss of Sam made Ben more determined than ever to ensure that the Double S Ranch continued to thrive, honoring the legacy of the man who had given him his start. He worked tirelessly, but he also made sure to carve out time for his family, having learned from Sam's tragedy that life could be cut short without warning, and that the people you loved were more important than any amount of work or success. Emma married her lawyer, Robert Hayes, in 1891, and they settled in Denver, where Robert's practice was growing. She gave birth to a daughter the following year, and Ben traveled to Denver to meet his niece, a trip that filled him with joy and a renewed appreciation for the bond between siblings. The 1890s brought both challenges and triumphs for the Sutton family. A drought in 1893 tested their resources and required careful management of water and grazing land, but Ben's years of experience and his natural instincts as a cattleman saw them through with minimal losses. A harsh winter in 1895 brought back memories of that first early storm when Ben and Nora had met, and they weathered it together, stronger for having survived so many seasons already. Will left the ranch briefly at 19, to attend an agricultural college in Sacramento, wanting to learn new methods and techniques that could benefit the operation. He returned 2 years later with a wealth of knowledge and a new appreciation for the traditional methods his father had taught him. And together, they began implementing improvements that increased the ranch's productivity and profitability. Jamie surprised everyone by announcing at 18 that he wanted to become a lawyer, inspired by his Uncle Robert. Ben and Nora supported his decision, proud that they had raised a son who felt free to follow his own path rather than feel obligated to stay on the ranch. Jamie attended law school in San Francisco, coming home for holidays and summers, and he remained close to his family despite the distance. Maggie, at 15, was already turning heads in Colombia, though she seemed oblivious to the attention from young men. She had her mother's practicality and her father's work ethic, and she declared her intention to stay on the ranch and help run it, much to Ben's mixed pride and concern. In the summer of 1899, exactly 21 years after that first meeting in the snow, Ben and Nora celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary. Will organized a party at the ranch, inviting neighbors, friends from Colombia, and family members who could make the journey. Emma and Robert came with their 3 children, and Jamie took time away from his law practice to be there. The celebration was held in the barn, decorated much as it had been for Ben and Nora's wedding reception, with lanterns and pine boughs and tables groaning under the weight of food Nora and Maggie had prepared. There was music and dancing, speeches and toasts, and through it all, Ben never left Nora's side, his hand finding hers constantly, his eyes seeking her face in the crowd. As the evening wound down and most of the guests had left, Ben led Nora out onto the porch of their house, the same house they had built together all those years ago. The summer night was warm, with stars brilliant overhead and the sound of crickets filling the air. 20 years, Ben said, pulling Nora close. Has it really been that long? It feels like both forever and no time at all, Nora said, resting her head on his chest and listening to the steady beat of his heart. Do you remember that day in the snow, when you gave me your coat? I remember thinking you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, Ben said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Standing there shivering in the snow, too proud to admit you were freezing, too stubborn to accept help until you had no choice. I fell in love with you in that moment, Nora. Before I even knew your name. And I fell in love with you the second you said you would stay close to keep warm, Nora admitted, tilting her head back to look up at her husband. His face had gained lines over the years, and there was gray in his hair now, but to her, he was still the handsome cowboy who had changed her life with a simple act of kindness. You promised to stay close, and you have kept that promise every day for 20 years. I will keep it for the rest of my life, Ben vowed, capturing her lips in a kiss that held all the love and passion of 2 decades together. You are my heart, Nora Sutton, my home, my everything. They stood together on the porch as the night deepened, wrapped in each other's arms, and Nora felt a profound sense of gratitude for the life they had built. From that desperate, cold day in Colombia when she had been alone and afraid, to this moment surrounded by family and love, the journey had been extraordinary. And it had all begun with a cowboy, a coat, and a promise to stay close. The new century dawned with hope and promise for the Sutton family. The Double S Ranch had become one of the most successful operations in the region, known for the quality of its cattle and the integrity of its owners. Ben had earned a reputation as a fair dealer and an astute businessman, while Nora was respected throughout Colombia and the surrounding area for her kindness and her fierce dedication to her family. Will married in 1902, to a sweet-natured girl named Sarah from a neighboring ranch, and they settled in a house Ben built for them on the Double S property. The following year, they gave Ben and Nora their first grandchild, a boy they named Benjamin Sterling Sutton in honor of his grandfather. The joy that little Benny brought to the family was immeasurable, and Ben delighted in being a grandfather with the same enthusiasm he had brought to fatherhood. Jamie established a successful law practice in San Francisco, but came home regularly. And in 1904, he brought with him a charming young woman named Catherine, whom he had been courting. They married that summer in a ceremony on the ranch, with the whole family in attendance, and Jamie's happiness was evident to everyone who saw him with his bride. Maggie, true to her word, stayed on the ranch and took on increasing responsibilities as Ben began to step back slightly from the day-to-day operations. At 20, she was a skilled horsewoman and an excellent judge of cattle, and she had a head for business that rivaled her brother Jamie's legal mind. Ben often joked that if Maggie had been his firstborn, he could have retired years earlier. In 1905, at the age of 49, Nora found herself pregnant again, a surprise that shocked both her and Ben. They had assumed their family was complete, with their youngest child now 20 years old, and the prospect of starting over with a baby at their age was both daunting and thrilling. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Ben asked her one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "We are not young anymore, Nora." "I am sure," Nora said, covering his hand with hers. "This baby is a gift, Ben, an unexpected one, but a gift nonetheless. We have more experience now, more patience, and more resources than we did when Will was born. We can do this." "We can do anything together," Ben agreed, leaning in to kiss her. "You have been proving that to me for 27 years. Their second daughter, whom they named Emma Grace Sutton after Ben's sister, was born in early 1906, a healthy baby who seemed determined to make her presence known from the moment she entered the world. Will and Sarah's son Benny, now 3 years old, was fascinated by the tiny baby, and Maggie immediately took on the role of protective big sister, helping Nora care for little Emma whenever she could. Ben, at 50, was a proud father all over again, and he approached this phase of fatherhood with a wisdom and gentleness that came from years of experience. He was more patient than he had been with his older children, more willing to slow down and savor the small moments, and Nora loved watching him with their baby daughter. The ranch continued to prosper through the first decade of the new century, with Will managing most of the day-to-day operations now, while Ben focused on strategic planning and expansion. They had added more land, improved their breeding stock, and established contracts with buyers in San Francisco and Sacramento that ensured steady prices for their cattle. Emma grew into a lively, intelligent child who seemed to embody the best qualities of both her parents. She had Nora's determination and practicality combined with Ben's warmth and sense of humor, and she was doted on by her entire family, from her parents and older siblings to the ranch hands who had watched the Sutton family grow over the years. In 1910, Ben and Nora celebrated their 32nd wedding anniversary quietly, with just their immediate family gathered around the dinner table in their home. Emma, now 4 years old, sat on Ben's lap while they ate, and Nora looked around at the faces of the people she loved most in the world and felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. Will and Sarah had given them 3 more grandchildren by then, making 4 in total. Jamie and Catherine had 2 children, both boys, who lived in San Francisco but visited the ranch regularly. Maggie, at 25, was finally being courted seriously by a rancher from a property to the south, a good man named Thomas Green, who seemed to appreciate Maggie's independent spirit rather than being intimidated by it. "What are you thinking about?" Ben asked later that evening after the family had dispersed and they were alone in their bedroom. Emma was asleep in her room down the hall, and the house was quiet except for the usual creaks and settling sounds of a well-loved home. "I am thinking about how lucky we are," Nora said, sitting at her dressing table and brushing her hair, a ritual Ben had watched countless times over the years. "About how different my life could have been if that storm had not rolled in early, if you had not been standing outside the general store that day, if you had not given me your coat." "I think we would have found each other anyway," Ben said, coming to stand behind her and taking the brush from her hand. He ran it through her hair, now streaked with silver but still thick and beautiful to him. "Some things are meant to be, Nora. You and I, we were always meant to be." "Do you ever think about what you would tell your younger self?" Nora asked, meeting his eyes in the mirror. "The man you were 32 years ago, working hard and saving every penny for a dream that must have seemed impossibly far away." Ben considered the question carefully as he continued brushing her hair. "I would tell him that the dream he is chasing is nothing compared to what he is actually going to get. I would tell him that he is going to meet a woman in the snow who will change everything, and that he should pay attention to every moment because it will all go by faster than he can imagine. I would tell him that being a husband and a father is going to be the hardest and most rewarding thing he ever does, and that he should never take a single day of it for granted." Tears slipped down Nora's cheeks, and Ben set down the brush to turn her around and pull her into his arms. "What about you?" he asked. "What would you tell your younger self?" "I would tell her that she is stronger than she thinks," Nora said, her voice muffled against his chest. "That losing everything is not the end of the world, that sometimes you have to lose everything to find what really matters. I would tell her to accept the coat when the handsome cowboy offers it, and to trust that staying close to him will be the best decision she ever makes." They held each other for a long time, two people who had weathered storms both literal and figurative, who had built a life from nothing more than hope and hard work and love. The years had marked them, carved lines into their faces and stolen the color from their hair, but they had also strengthened them, forged them into a partnership that could weather anything. Maggie married Thomas Green in 1911, in a ceremony on the ranch that was elegant and joyful. Thomas proved to be not just a good husband but a valuable addition to the ranch operations, bringing his own expertise and ideas that complemented what the Suttons had already established. He and Maggie built a house on the property, and within 2 years they had given Ben and Nora 2 more grandchildren, twin girls who were as spirited and independent as their mother. Emma grew up surrounded by family, with more aunts, uncles, and cousins than she could easily count. She attended school in Columbia, but spent her afternoons and weekends on the ranch, learning everything her father and older siblings could teach her about running the operation. She had a natural gift with animals, particularly horses, and by the time she was 10, she could outride most of the ranch hands. The years between 1910 and 1920 were good ones for the Sutton family. The ranch continued to prosper, weathering economic downturns and droughts with the resilience that came from decades of experience. Will took over more and more of the leadership responsibilities, allowing Ben to truly step back and enjoy a semi-retirement that he had earned many times over. Ben spent his days working on projects that interested him, breaking horses for pleasure rather than necessity, and most importantly, spending time with Nora and their youngest daughter. He taught Emma everything he knew about ranching, but he also made sure she learned to read and write well, to understand mathematics and history, wanting her to have the education he had never received. Nora, at 65, was still the heart of the family, the one everyone turned to for advice, comfort, and the kind of unconditional love that only a mother could provide. She had handed over most of the cooking duties to Sarah and the wives of the ranch hands, but she still supervised the kitchen and stepped in for special occasions. Her biscuits and stews still legendary among anyone who had ever tasted them. In the spring of 1920, Ben and Nora celebrated their 42nd wedding anniversary. By then, they had 12 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren, with more on the way. The family had gathered for a massive celebration, with 4 generations of Suttons present, and the sight of it all filled Ben with a pride and satisfaction that was almost overwhelming. "We did this," he said to Nora as they stood together watching their family mingle and laugh, children running around while adults caught up and shared stories. "We built all of this from nothing. We built it from love," Nora corrected gently. "Everything else came from that." That evening, after everyone had left or retired to their various homes on the property, Ben and Nora took a walk together, something they had done countless times over the years. They walked up into the hills behind their house, following paths worn smooth by decades of footsteps, and stopped at the clearing where Ben had taken Nora on their first real date all those years ago. The view was the same, the valley spreading out below them bathed in the golden light of sunset, but everything else had changed. The ranch was bigger now, with more buildings and fences, more life and activity. But the essence of it, the heart of it, remained the same as it had been when Sam Sterling had first offered Ben a partnership and a chance to build something of his own. "You remember when we came here?" Nora asked, leaning against Ben's side. "You told me about your dreams." "I remember you telling me about yours," Ben said. "You said you wanted a life where you mattered, where what you did made a difference to the people around you. I hope you know that you achieved that, Nora. You matter to so many people, and you have made such a profound difference in all our lives." "We did it together," Nora insisted. "Everything good in my life came from that day when you gave me your coat and told me you would stay close. You kept that promise, Ben. Through everything, you have always stayed close." "And I always will," Ben said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "For as long as I have breath in my body, I will stay close to you, Nora Sutton." They watched the sun sink below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange, pink, and purple, and then they made their way back down the hill to their home, walking slowly, hand in hand, 2 people who had found in each other everything they had ever needed. The 1920s brought changes to the ranch and the family, as the world around them modernized and new technologies began to reshape how ranching was done. Will and Thomas invested in trucks to supplement the horses and wagons, making it easier to transport cattle and supplies. Emma, now a young woman of 19, argued passionately for installing a telephone line to the ranch, finally convincing her father that it was a practical necessity rather than a frivolous expense. Ben, now in his 70s, found that his body no longer cooperated the way it once had. His joints ached in the morning, and he tired more easily than he liked to admit. But his mind was still sharp, and his love for Nora had not diminished by even a fraction over the decades they had spent together. Nora, too, felt the weight of years, but she faced it with the same practicality she had brought to every other challenge in her life. She made sure she and Ben walked every day, believing that movement kept them young. She prepared nutritious meals and insisted they both rest when they needed to, even as they remained active in the family and ranch business. Emma was courted by several young men from Columbia and the surrounding ranches, but she seemed in no hurry to marry, preferring to spend her time working alongside her father and brothers. Ben secretly hoped she would wait, selfishly wanting to keep his youngest child close for as long as possible, though he would never have said so aloud. In 1924, tragedy struck when a winter illness swept through Colombia, claiming several lives including that of Tom, one of the original ranch hands who had worked at the Double S since before Ben and Nora were married. The loss hit the family hard, a reminder that time was precious and that the people they loved would not be with them forever. The funeral brought the family together, and as Ben stood at the graveside, he felt Nora's hand slip into his. He squeezed it gently, grateful beyond words for her steady presence beside him. They had lost friends and family members over the years, had weathered grief and hardship, but they had done it together, and that had made all the difference. Winter turned to spring, and then summer, and life continued on the ranch. Will and Sarah's oldest son, young Ben, graduated from the agricultural college and returned to work on the ranch, representing the third generation of Suttons to call the Double S home. Jamie's practice in San Francisco continued to thrive, and he had become something of an advocate for farmers and ranchers, using his legal expertise to help people like his own family navigate the increasingly complex world of contracts and regulations. Emma surprised everyone in 1925 by announcing her engagement to Daniel Warren, a veterinarian who had moved to Colombia the previous year. Daniel was quiet and intelligent, with a deep love of animals that matched Emma's own, and Ben approved of him immediately. They married in the fall, in a ceremony that was smaller and more intimate than Maggie's had been, but no less joyful. As the 1920s drew to a close, Ben and Nora found themselves surrounded by a family that had grown beyond anything they could have imagined on that cold day in November of 1878. They had 5 children, though Will, Jamie, and Maggie were all grown with families of their own. They had countless grandchildren and great-grandchildren, a thriving ranch that would continue for generations, and a legacy of love and hard work that would outlive them both. On a clear evening in late 1929, just days before their 51st wedding anniversary, Ben and Nora sat together on the porch of their home, wrapped in blankets against the autumn chill. Emma and Daniel lived in town now, where Daniel's veterinary practice was located, but they visited regularly, and young Ben was managing the ranch with the same skill and dedication his grandfather had shown. 51 years, Ben said, his voice rough with age but still strong. We have been married for 51 years, Nora. That is longer than most people live. It has been the best 51 years anyone could ask for, Nora said, leaning her head on his shoulder. Her hair was completely silver now, and her hands were gnarled with arthritis, but to Ben, she was still the most beautiful woman in the world. You remember what I said to you that first day? Ben asked. When I gave you my coat. You said you would stay close to keep warm, Nora recalled, smiling at the memory. And I have, Ben said. I have stayed as close to you as I could every single day since then. You have been my warmth, Nora, my light, my reason for everything. And you have been mine, Nora whispered, tears sliding down her weathered cheeks. I love you, Benjamin Sutton. I have loved you from the moment you gave me that coat, and I will love you until the day I die and beyond. They sat together as the stars came out, holding hands the way they had done countless times before, 2 souls so entwined that it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. They had started with nothing but a coat and a promise, and they had built an empire of love that would endure long after they were gone. Ben passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1931, at the age of 76. He died in the bed he had shared with Nora for over 50 years, in the house they had built together, surrounded by the family they had created. His last words, whispered to Nora as she held his hand, were simply, "Thank you for staying close." Nora mourned him deeply, feeling as if half of herself had been torn away. But she was sustained by her children, her grandchildren, and her great-grandchildren, all of whom carried pieces of Ben in their faces, their mannerisms, their values. She continued to live in their house, refusing to move in with any of her children despite their offers, insisting that she could still care for herself. She spent her days surrounded by memories, walking through the rooms where she and Ben had laughed and loved, fought and made up, raised their children, and grown old together. She tended the small garden behind the house, read the books Jamie sent her from San Francisco, and welcomed the constant stream of visitors who came to see her and pay their respects to the woman who had helped build the Double S Ranch into what it had become. On warm evenings, Nora would sit on the porch in the rocking chair Ben had made for her 40th birthday, wrapped in the sheepskin coat he had given her that first day in Colombia. The coat was old now, worn and patched in places, but Nora had never been able to part with it. It still smelled faintly of leather and hay, and when she wore it, she could almost feel Ben's arms around her again. Nora lived for another 6 years after Ben's death, remaining sharp and engaged with the world around her until the very end. She saw Emma give birth to 3 children, watched young Ben marry and start a family of his own, and held her first great-great-grandchild, a girl named Nora in her honor. She passed away in the spring of 1937 at the age of 81, on a warm afternoon with wildflowers blooming in the hills around the ranch. Her children and grandchildren were with her, and her last words, spoken with a peaceful smile, were, "I am ready to stay close again." They buried her next to Ben in the cemetery outside Columbia, under a headstone that read, "Nora Lawson Sutton, beloved wife, mother, grandmother 1856, 1937. She built a life from love. The Double S Ranch continued to thrive, passed down through the generations, a testament to the foundation Ben and Nora had built." Their story became family legend, told and retold to children and grandchildren. The tale of a cowboy who gave his coat to a stranger in the snow and found in her the love of his life. The sheepskin coat was preserved by Emma, treated with care and displayed in a shadow box in her home, a tangible reminder of the moment that had changed everything for her family. And every November, when the first snow fell in the Sierra Nevada foothills, the Sutton family would gather at the ranch to remember Ben and Nora, to honor the legacy they had left behind, and to celebrate the enduring truth that love, more than anything else, was what built lasting foundations. Their great-great-grandchildren would stand in the clearing where Ben had once taken Nora on their first date, looking out over the valley that the Suttons still called home, and they would hear the story again. Of a woman with no coat when winter came early, of a cowboy who gave his and promised to stay close to keep warm, and of the beautiful life they had built together from that one act of kindness in the snow. And in that way, Ben and Nora Sutton lived on, not just in the blood of their descendants or in the success of the ranch they had founded, but in the lesson they had taught about love, about loyalty, about the power of staying close to the people who mattered most, through every season and every storm that life might bring.